Okay, well, thank you for asking me, Mary. It's lovely to be here. There's loads of people in the room who I know really well. Known you for several years while we've been fighting this incredible fight to retain and cherish our European values, and we're not going to stop doing that. So I think it's really brilliant that you're continuing to do this and to be proudly European in a very European city. And this is citizenship, isn't it? And I was on the Education and Culture Committee for the whole of the 5.5 years that I was in the European Parliament as your representative. And citizenship is one of the it's one of the areas that was in my portfolio. And I've always thought that citizenship, for me, is defined by people being active as opposed to being passive in a classroom, receiving information, perhaps not listening, because it's not always relevant when you're sitting in desks, is it? It's perhaps much more relevant when, in fact, it's under threat, when you feel that your rights as a citizen are somehow being taken away from you. And I really just want to say thank you for being active citizens. I think that's really, really important. And certainly within the committee, we had many important discussions about citizenship and about active citizenship. But my other committee was the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee. And I was a substitute in that committee. And a substitute means generally you go and vote if somebody else can't. But actually, in the European Parliament, you can be as busy as you want. And I didn't do my work on the FEM committee as a substitute. Okay, I did it full on for the 5 years that I was on that committee. And I think that's because I partly came into politics because of the scourge of violence against women and girls, the global scourge of violence. And in fact, it was the death of Jayoti Singh Pandey in 2012. She was the Indian student who was raped on a bus in Delhi and then died of her injuries 10 days later. And actually, I've been thinking about putting my name down to be an MEP. And I just kept thinking, well, I haven't, how can I? I haven't been in politics before and nobody knows who I am. And, I don't even know who's in the shadow cabinet. And, I don't even know what Labour policy is, even though I'm a member. And actually, it's her death that spurred me into action. So I always like to share that story. I particularly like to share it as we are coming up to International Women's Day, because it stopped me from being a bystander, all right? And all of us who are now standing up against attacks on our human rights, we are no longer bystanders, all right? We take action. We are going to defend our rights. And I think that's an important thing that happened to many people in our pro-European movement, that we realised, in fact, that our rights were going to be under attack. So, all our rights are going to be under attack with Brexit, and all our rights are under attack globally, because the people who are coming who are coming, against the rights of refugees, for example, are also against women's rights. They're also against gay rights. They're also against disability rights. Okay, so this is a global phenomena that has been happening, and women's rights, gender equality, is actually enshrined in the EU treaties. So it's there in the treaties that there shall be equality between men and women. And I've always felt very proud about that. I think that's a very important concept. I think it's a very important protection, actually. And it's there in the treaties that there shall be equality. So in the Women's Rights Committee, we weren't a legislative committee, but what we were doing was making sure that all the other committees were putting women's rights, gender equality at the forefront of the legislation that was made. And I was responsible for the gender mainstreaming report in the European Parliament, which is about how the Parliament and the institutions work to put gender equality at the centre of the work. And that meant that on each of the committees, we would have a gender mainstreaming focal point, okay? To somebody who would just have their tenor kind of attuned to whether or not this legislation that we were making or the policies that we were writing were going to be gender sensitive. And Brexit really puts all that at risk. And why does it do that? Okay, and it's partly because the government have chosen to take us out of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And many of our rights are rights that have been given to us not necessarily through the EU. So, for example, the rights that have accrued to us through global charters and also UK law and a whole range of different things which have kind of come together. But what's so interesting about the Charter of Fundamental Rights was that it drew all that together into and made it a kind of floor for protection. And so coming out of that sort of destabilizes our protections. It puts them at risk. It means that they're not all drawn together into this really important, strong package that we signed up to as a member state. So I'm going to tell you about a report that was written last year. It's online, so you can look at it. It's called womenandbrexit.com, and it's a report that was researched and written by Mary Honeyball, who for a long time was the Labour MEP who was our spokesperson for women's rights and gender equality, did loads of brilliant work on stopping trafficking, and we've been talking about that here this evening. She stood down at the end of last year, but this was kind of her swan song, so I just want to give her the credit that's due for the amazing work that she did. And her incredible young researcher, Hannah Manzur. And again, I want to give credit to the amazing people that we've had working for us in the European Parliament and in our UK parliamentary offices while we've been doing our job. So this report looks at four issues, and I was told to talk about 5 points, so I'm going to talk about 4 and then talk about something else, okay? So the risks to women's rights and gender equality partly come through equality law because of what I've already said about us not being in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And that means that post-Brexit it's possible for the government to amend, replace, revoke key rights, protections and standards within UK equality law because they're not going to be guaranteed by EU law. And the government consistently rejected proposals and amendments to the Withdrawal Act in 2018. So this report I'm talking to you about was published in September 2019, so before the current withdrawal agreement. But in fact, things are not any better with the current agreement. In fact, they are worse, okay? So everything I'm talking to you about now stands, and it's worse, okay? So the EHRC, so that's the it's the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and the House of Commons Women and Equalities Committee, which is cross-party, criticised the government's failure to engage with key amendments and proposals that would have included women and gender equality within the Withdrawal Act and the agreement. So they were actually criticised at UK level for not actually taking this seriously. And the Withdrawal Act of 2018 didn't mention women or gender equality once in its 107 pages. And that is an appalling abdication of responsibility, isn't it? I just feel that not to understand, to make specific reference to women's rights within a key piece of legislation going forward in the 21st century is really an aberration. The government was also very reluctant about discussing how human rights standards would be protected post-Brexit, and that goes right across all rights, so employment rights, trade agreements as well. So in everything that they were talking about, they just didn't want to have any kind of gender-sensitive discussions And I talk about that because I learned so much about the way that we do things, have been doing things in the European Parliament, where we've got these kind of finely tuned antenna to pick up all these issues. There were no gender impact assessments done. So, and in fact, we were constantly asking for impact assessments, like regional impact assessments. We didn't get any of the impact assessments, frankly. They were locked away in a drawer if they were ever done, and only, half published when we really made a lot of fuss and nonsense about it, but no gender impact assessments at all. And there was a lot of resistance during the negotiations and the implementation of EU equality legislation leading up to the referendum itself. And so, for example, it was always the UK government blocking in the EU Council. So blocking, for example, women on boards, blocking the maternity directive. We were trying to get better maternity protection. Blocking the legislation that's just come on stream through the European Parliament on work-life balance directive, which is a fantastic piece of legislation that actually gives carers, not just parents, paid leave, okay, the right to paid leave. So, and we kept being told it's the UK that's blocking this important legislation. So if they were blocking then, they certainly don't want to have it in any kind of post-Brexit scenario. There's a whole load of legal things. I'm going to move on a bit because the legal issues are really important. But the other section that they talk about is the socio-economic impact of Brexit on women. So, and that's partly because of austerity. So after years and years of austerity, women pay the highest price for austerity. Why is that? Well, because often women are the people managing the budget at home. We've got a lot of single parents. We've got a lot of families in poverty. Women would be making those difficult decisions about whether or not to turn on the heating, or to buy the child a new pair of shoes, or to pay for some outing or whatever with the school. And so women generally bear the brunt of austerity. And Brexit is just going to mean more and more austerity because it's already cost us as a country more. Brexit has already cost us more than all the money that we paid to be a member of the EU for all the years that we have been a member. So we're going to be, we're going to have austerity on steroids, folks, okay? It'll be dressed up, it'll be kicked down the road, people will pretend it's not happening or whatever. But I think that the situation, the socio and economic impact for women is going to be really serious. We also know that when parents and when families are really, really struggling with money at home, the violence becomes more prevalent in families. So there's more domestic abuse, and because of austerity measures, we've had refuges closing, we've had legal aid taken away. So there's a whole raft of support for women struggling in those difficult circumstances that have already been removed. European Social Fund has funded so many amazing projects to support women and children and families who are struggling, and those things are being taken away. So the socio-economic impact is really serious. But I just want to talk a little bit about intersectionality. So this is a concept that we used in my political group in the Parliament, which is the Socialists and Democrats, where we looked at multiple discrimination. So, for example, we know that women are more discriminated against than men. But we know, for example, that Roma women are more discriminated against than, for example, me. Okay? And then we will know that lesbian women would be more discriminated against. We know that women living in rural areas will be more discriminated against. And once you put all those discriminations together, that's called intersectionality. It's where you have many characteristics defining you in terms of not fitting the norm, if you like, and it's those people who then become even more affected. So the socio-economic impact kind of starts doubling up, tripling up, the more that people have those different intersecting identities, okay? The other issue about Brexit and women is that women's voices were not heard, okay? Despite the fact that Theresa May was a woman Prime Minister, she only sent 2 women negotiators when she was Prime Minister. I think there were 13 negotiators going on a regular basis, only 2 women. So we know that women's voices have not been heard in this process. And we can see from the appointments that have continued to be made, it's a very male-dominated kind of arena, isn't it? And the whole kind of posturing that happens, you know, is about being a tough guy, okay, not giving the EU an inch, isn't it? It's a very kind of male approach to things. And I do love you guys, I have to say, so this isn't an anti-men rant, okay, because we need you in our fight, okay? You have to be with us on this journey. But I think it's very difficult as a woman to look at that kind of, look at those people, look at Dominic Raab, look at David Davis, okay? These were the people going to negotiate on our behalf, right? And they just didn't represent us. We never saw ourselves represented in the people who were supposed to be standing up for us, okay? Getting that good deal, whatever it was, okay? They were not there. And I think that's meant that the Brexit that's kind of being presented, or the deal that actually the government want, is not going to really bring those broader perspectives that I've just been talking about into play, okay? And I think that's a very dangerous situation for us to be in. Sorry?
Just for women.
No, not just for women.
Across the piece.
Across the piece, you know, disabled people as well. I mean, you know, in terms of intersectionality, I have to say that disabled people really, really suffer enormously from Brexit for a whole number of reasons. I mean, I'm not talking about women specifically tonight, disability tonight, but certainly the conversations I have with a lot of people with disabilities, it's a very serious issue for them. So, and the other issue about women and socio-economic impact is about carers. So women tend to be unpaid carers. They often tend to be in precarious work. They're often doing not one job or 2 jobs, but several jobs, you know, in order to kind of make a living. So the employment pattern for women it tends to be very different. And the carer issue is very important. I just want to talk about this because I was made aware of the situation of Zambrano carers, and nobody had thought about that in the withdrawal agreement. And I'm really proud that my office actually raised that issue nationally and with the government, and the issue of Zambrano carers was then finally addressed. So for those of you that don't know, Zambrano carers are carers who are not EU 27 citizens. They are carers from other countries, so outside, you know, what would be deemed to be third countries, outside of the EU, but they do an important job here in this country because they're looking after our old people, they're looking after our people, our children with disabilities. And I know that in my own family, so my mum had a carer from Ghana, for example, so she was a Zambrano carer. And their rights had been totally disregarded and not thought about in respect of the agreement. And I am so proud that my office raised that issue and we did something about that. I'm just going to move on now. So the 4th issue that comes up in the report is the impact of Brexit on women's organisations and vulnerable groups. I did talk a little bit about this when I was talking about the issue of violence against women and girls, but we know that the European Social Fund has been a great supporter of all those voluntary groups, if you like, the civil society groups, the support groups that are there for people in the communities. and also for social enterprises that get set up to help people move on after maybe they've gone through a difficult period in their lives. And we know that this government's supposed shared prosperity fund, isn't going to come anywhere near replacing any of that funding. And of course, Liverpool has been a huge beneficiary of European funding, and much of it has gone to those kinds of groups. So once again, we have a real problem. Okay. Muslim women are being disproportionately affected. I suppose one of the terrible things about Brexit was the way that the right-wing press stirred up all that xenophobia and Islamophobia, and that's still continuing. And even today we're seeing that the issue of coronavirus is also taking a nasty turn in terms of how people who are perceived to be Chinese, for example, or from one of the countries that's where coronavirus is really taken hold, that these people are being attacked on the streets. So this, so I suppose anybody who is other, anybody who doesn't fit that kind of norm now is very, very vulnerable. But I want to talk about something positive for my fifth point. I think that's important because you're here, right? I'm not an MEP anymore, but I'm still pretty much as busy as I was when I was an MEP. And I think that's because you can't take the activist out of somebody, okay? And all of you learned to be activists, even if you didn't think you were before, you are now, okay? You're turning up to things, you're bothered, okay? You're not being quiet, okay? You're determined to continue to stand up for European values. And I was been sort of pondering today about the title of these evenings, Worldwide Wednesdays, and how important that is. And I think that what we have to do is start with our neighbours, actually. I think we have to look at who our neighbours are, and we have to be kind to our neighbours. That we have to start being kind to each other. We have to start holding out that hand of friendship to each other. And being neighbourly to each other is really, really important. And we must never descend to the xenophobia and the division and the hate that's been stirred up by the papers and the right-wing press and by the kind of rabid Brexiteers and the xenophobes and the Islamophobes. We must never resort to that. So I kind of see what you're doing. It's not only about citizenship, it's also about neighbourliness. But if you extend that idea of neighbourliness, of course, as a nation, our nearest neighbours are our European neighbours, aren't they? And we have to continue to stand in solidarity with our European neighbours and have them stand in solidarity with us. We have to, understand that neighbours need to be looking out for each other all the time. And I kind of wanted to say that because the government is got this idea about how we're going to, be a kind of super new kind of international, outward-looking kind of country. And their idea of Worldwide Wednesday, I think, would be very different from your idea of Worldwide Wednesday. And so I think if you can make Worldwide Wednesday this a place for neighbourliness, for random acts of kindness, okay, for inclusion, for holding out that hand of friendship to the other, then I think you're going to do something, in fact, that's going to transcend the unpleasantness and the difficulties of Brexit. Because what we found through all the campaigns that we did over the past few years is we found joy, diversity, creativity. Whenever I've been on marches and I compare the marches of the Remainers to the marches and the campaign actions of the Brexiteers, what I perceived was that they were devoid of joy and diversity and creativity. And that's what we had. Okay? So hold on to that. because we are going to return to the EU. I was with Lloyd Russell Moyle 10 days ago, and he believes, yes, we will be back in again. He is a wonderful Labour MP, but he was also the president of the European Youth Forum for many years. And I think that young people will take us back. They won't allow us to be outside. They won't allow their own future opportunities to be limited. And we've just got to keep that door open, folks, okay? And we've got to keep holding out that hand. So thank you so much.